Hello, math students. This is our introduction to our lesson on writing equations to model relationships. This is a two-part lesson. The first part really focuses on can you write an equation given a story? Some of the vocabulary in this lesson, this all should be reviewed if you took pre-algebra with me. Variable, we know is a letter that represents an unknown number or amount of something. Equation and expression get mixed up sometimes. The main idea for equation is it will have an equal sign in it. So for example, 2 plus 3 equals 5 is an equation. An expression is just a group of numbers, operations, variables, but there's no equal sign. So something like 2 plus 3 would be an expression. The focus today, we are going to be writing equations, and we might need some variables depending on the story. This first story here is really where you start as math students. We've got Rama works as a waiter at a restaurant. He makes $8 per hour and tips. Write an equation to represent how much money he makes if he works 10 hours and makes $100 in tips. If you took developmental math with me, these are the type of stories we started with. Go ahead, stop the video here and try this first story and then come back to check your answer. I went ahead and I circled our important information. We know he makes $8 per hour and he worked 10 hours. That describes multiplication. I need to do $8 times the 10 hours. He also makes $100 in tips. That's money he also makes, so I would want to add $100. The directions tell me to write an equation to represent how much money he makes. And so my equation would just be what this equals. I know 8 times 10 is 80, and 80 plus 100 is 180. This equation right here is where a lot of us start as math students. The second story is going to sound really similar, but the second story is more the type of stories we saw in pre-algebra. Here we have Adson works as a waiter at a restaurant. He makes $8 per hour and received $75 in tips yesterday. Write an equation to represent how much total money he makes. Again, this is review, especially if you took pre-algebra with me. So go ahead, stop the video and try this problem. So just like Rama, Adson also makes $8 per hour, but this time I don't know how many hours he works. The story doesn't say. So this is one of the times we would need a variable. I might use H to represent the number of hours he works. The math we're describing is still the same. It's still multiplication, but I would have to say 8 times H. And so we've learned if you have a variable and a number, when you put them right next to each other like that, it means multiplication. I also know he receives $75 in tips. So just like we did with that first story, we would want to add in that money he makes from his tips. The final part of this, same as before, the directions are write an equation. The problem here though is I don't know how much total money he makes. I can't give an answer the same way we did up here because I don't know how many hours he works. I don't know how many times he gets paid $8. One of the mistakes students make is they try adding 8 plus 75, but that would mean he only worked 1 hour, and I don't know from the story how many hours he works. So I might need another variable here, maybe M. We'll let M represent the total money he makes. And this is where we stop in pre-algebra with stories like these where you might see 1 or 2 variables. The last story is going to be new for us. In this final story, we've got Isa works as a waiter at a restaurant. He earns an hourly rate and also earns tips. Write an equation to represent how much money he makes. As you read this story, you might notice there are no numbers in this story. I didn't give you any of the information, but just like the others, you can still write an equation because we know what math is happening. It's the same math that was happening in these first 2 stories. I know he earns an hourly rate. And so, just like before, there's going to be some multiplication there. We would be multiplying that money he makes per hour times the number of hours he works. But here, I don't know either of those things, so I would need two variables. I might use R to represent that hourly rate, or you could also say the money made per hour. And then I'm also going to need a variable to represent the number of hours worked. Just like above, that would be multiplication there, but now it's going to say R times H, the money he makes each hour times the number of hours he works. Also like above, he earns tips, but I don't know how many tips, so I'm going to need a variable for that. T can represent the amount in tips. But just like before, I know that is extra money he's earning, so I would want to add the amount of money he gets in tips. And finally, the directions say write an equation, so I know my answer should have an equal sign. It would equal the total money he makes, but I definitely don't know that if I don't know any of this information. So I might use M again, where M represents the total money earned. In algebra, we're going to see more complex stories like this, where we might not have any of the information, or we might have stories where you might have more unknowns than just two, like the one with ADSIM. Hopefully you feel prepared for today's lesson. Thanks so much for watching.